These words belong to the late, great Ella Baker. Her foundation paved the way for Black women like me to speak and operate space of power and freedom that I have in 2024 that we may not have had she not existed and fought for our rights throughout the 50s, 60s, and well before that time. So I'd like to say these words, and I'd like for you to take them in, because the truth is that the fight still continues. And these words are just as relevant now in 2024 as they were when she said them ages ago. I was a little bit amazed as to why the selection of the discussion on the role of Black women in the world. I was just saying to Bernice Reagan that I've never been one to feel great needs to set myself apart as a woman. I first and foremost have always considered people to be individuals. But wherever there is struggle in the world, Black women are at the center of that struggle. During slavery, there was a tremendous amount of resistance. Now that resistance came in forms that were subtle, and they came in forms that were more severe. One of the more subtle forms of resistance was that of feigning illness. One of the more severe forms of resistance, and perhaps more shocking, and has not been told to a great extent, is that of Black women killing their own children rather than have them live as slaves. There's a story of a Black woman in Kentucky who bore 13 children and strangled each of them with her own hands, rather than have them live as slaves. Now, this calls for a certain type of deep commitment and resentment. Hey, baby. No, doing well. Commitment to freedom and deep resentment against slavery. Now, I'd like to divide the remaining parts of my comments into two areas. First, the aspect that deals with the struggle to get into the society, the struggle to be a part of the American scene. And second, the struggle for a different kind of society. Now, the latter is the more radical struggle. The struggle for being part of the society also led to a major phase of the civil rights struggle. That was the period in which legalism, or the approach to battling down barriers in racial segregation through the courts, which was spearheaded by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. We moved from questioning equal educational opportunity and thinking in terms of how we could uplift teacher salaries into another phase, which was equality in travel accommodations. Now, one of the youngest persons who was part of the efforts to test segregated travel was Paul Murray, dear friend. Paulie and I were part of the committee that was organized to try to go to the South in Jim Crow and test out bus traffic. But the decision was made that only the men could go. Now, I had just finished a tour of duty with the NAACP all up and down the South in Jim Crow buses, and I very much wanted to go, but I guess it was decided and I was too frail for such a journey. I think the period that is most important to most of us right now is this period when we began to question whether we as a people really want to be. Even though the sit-in movement started off with the concept of questioning what was, we really had to decide if we wanted to get in and go the lengths to be there. The first effort was to sit down at lunch counters. Now, I would think that the sit-inners who were the first to do so would have been the ones to have dealt with the most gruesome experiences, but to be completely honest, all of us had to face that. It was a battle. And there were those who saw from the beginning the struggle was much bigger than getting a hamburger from a lunch counter. In fact, the struggle was for full dignity from us as human beings. So out of that came two things. The first that came that was most significant was the concept of training to find one's identity and working with the masses. Another thing that came out of it at a later period was leadership training. As the young people moved into the community and finally were able to be accepted, they began to partner with indigenous leaders. Now, around 1965, there began to develop a great deal of questioning about what was the role of Black women within this struggle. Out of it came the concept that Black women had to bolster the ego of the male. It was implied that the Black male had been treated in such a manner to have been emasculated by both white society and Black women because females ran the household. Now we began to deal with the question of how Black women would deal with playing a subordinate role. I personally never thought of this as being valid because it raises the question as to whether the Black man is going to be a man on the basis of his capacity to deal with issues rather than be a man because some people around him have claimed to take a subordinate role. I don't think you could go through the freedom movement without finding that the backbone of the support of the movement were women. When demonstrations took place and when the community acted, it was usually because women came to the fore. I think at this stage, the big question is, what is the American society? Is it the kind of society that either Black women or Black men or anyone who is seeing a dignified existence as a human being permits people to grow and develop accordingly to their capacity? Is it a society that gives people a sense of value, not just for themselves, but a sense of value for all other human beings? Is this the kind of society that is going to permit that? I think there's a great question as to whether it can become that kind of society. Now, in order for us as a poor and as an oppressed people to become part of a society that is meaningful, the system under which we live must be radically changed. Now, that is easier said than done. But one of the things that has to be fixed is in the process of wanting to change this system, how much we've got to find out who we are, where we are going, where we have come from, most importantly, and the how we want to get there. Years ago, I used to go around making speeches, and I would open up my talk by saying that there was a man who had a health problem, and finally he was told by the doctors that they could heal his vision and restore it, or they could heal his memory and restore it. His vision or his memory, but they couldn't heal both. Now, he said, "Please save my sight." They asked him why. And he said, "I would rather see where I'm going than remember where I have been." I am saying, as you must say as well, that in order to see where we are going, we must not only remember where we have been, but we must understand where we have been. This calls for a great deal of analytical thinking, an evolution of methods that have been used. We have to begin to think in terms of where do we really want to go, and how can we get there? Finally, I think it's also to be said that it is not a job that is going to be done by all the people simultaneously. No. Some people will have to be in cadres, some in advanced cadres. But one of the guiding principles that we have to stick to is that we have to ensure that the masses of people understand what their potentials are and understand what their strengths are. Thank you.